Every moment of making a cup of coffee, the barista faces 3 rules. Rule 1, where will you choose the coffee beans from? Rule 2, how long are you going to roast the beans and how will you brew them with water? Rule 3, what ingredients will you add to complete the coffee? Whether it's an Americano or a latte, coffee has rules that must be followed like cooking, and good baristas follow those rules thoroughly to make good coffee. But how and when did these 3 rules start? There were 3 baristas at each starting point. Let's learn about the 3 baristas who changed the history of coffee. First, Muhammad al-Dhabhani. The first way humans consumed coffee was not as a drink, but as a fruit. About 300,000 years ago, when modern humans, Homo sapiens, roamed around East Africa, there was a coffee tree bearing red fruits near them. It is quite probable that our ancestors knew the sweet-sour taste of coffee berries. Therefore, it must have been known quite early on that eating coffee berries can strangely improve mental performance. So, who was the first barista to think of making this coffee berry into a drink? It is said that the 9th century Persian physician al-Razi was the first to document coffee as a drink, but unfortunately, that record is not known today. He wasn't the first to popularize the coffee we drink today. It was a 15th century Yemeni barista, Muhammad al-Dhabhani. At that time, a sect of Islamic mysticism called the Sufi used to spend the night performing rituals to meet the gods. They drank tea with a leaf called khat to keep themselves alert and called this drink kahwa. But khat had one problem. It grew only at high altitudes and turned bad easily, so it couldn't be transported over long distances. People living far away from the mountains have had a hard time finding fresh khat, so they had to find a substitute. In this situation, it was coffee berries that al-Dhabhani paid attention to because they gave the same effect as khat, and when dried, they could be transported a long distance. He made a drink by boiling dried coffee berries in water, and people also call this drink kahwa. This is the starting point of what we call coffee today. Since then, instead of using the whole dried berry, kahwa has developed into a form of brewing beverages by roasting only the seed in the berry. This drink first became popular in Yemen and then spread to the surrounding areas. It began to be introduced to Arabs in Mecca and Cairo at the end of the 15th century, to the Turks in Istanbul at the beginning of the 16th century, and to Europe by the 17th century. In the course of this propagation, the word also changed gradually, and the Arabic word kahwa became kahve in Turkish, kafe in Italian, café in German, café in French, and coffee in English. Until the end of the 17th century, coffee was mostly produced in East Africa or the Arabian Peninsula. Since these beans were first gathered at the port city of Mocha in Yemen and then distributed to other regions, the word mocha became another name for coffee. Afterwards, coffee was produced on the island of Java at the end of the 17th century, and in the Caribbean and Brazil in the 18th century, and coffee production areas gradually diversified. Each coffee bean has a slightly different taste and aroma depending on the temperature, rainfall, sunlight, and soil composition of the production area, and that has become a characteristic of coffee as it is. The first rule of making a cup of coffee. Find the beans that best match the coffee you want to make. It originated from the suggestion of Yemeni barista al-Dhabhani in the early 15th century. Second, Jean-Baptiste de Bellois. After coffee was brought to Europe in the 17th century, more and more people fell in love with it as time passed. However, even in the early 19th century, when coffee was produced in diverse places, the method of making coffee itself was relatively monotonous. As coffee itself was transmitted from the Islamic world. Europeans also enjoyed coffee in the Islamic way at first. They put ground coffee beans and water together in a kettle called jezve and boiled it. However, this method left the coffee powder intact in the drink, leaving a heavy texture and a slightly stale taste. In the 18th century in France, a method of filtering coffee grounds was developed, but it did not work well, and coffee grounds were still present in the drink. The person who solved this problem was Jean-Baptiste de Bellois, a French barista in the early 19th century. Around 1800, de Bellois devised a new brewing apparatus that filters coffee grounds relatively perfectly. By extracting coffee using this device, coffee with a much lighter and cleaner texture was obtained than before. This has led people to look at coffee from a whole new perspective. They realized that not only where the beans were produced, but also how they were extracted into beverages had an important influence on the taste of coffee. Therefore, after de Bellois, various brewing equipment such as siphon, espresso machine, drip, French press, and mocha pot began to appear in Europe. Baristas knew how to add subtle differences to the coffee flavor by varying the extraction method. In the middle of the 20th century, baristas appear who claim that how to roast coffee beans is also important, going one step further from how to extract coffee from the beans. This is because coffee beans have a completely different taste depending on how they are roasted. For example, in the 1960s, Alfred Peet, a Dutch barista living in Berkeley, USA, thought that when coffee beans are roasted over high heat and darkened, the sour taste becomes weaker and the bitter taste becomes stronger, resulting in the true taste of coffee. On the other hand, in the 1970s, barista George Howell, who lived in Boston, USA, believed that the true taste of coffee was to develop the original sour taste and unique flavor of the beans by lightly roasting them. So today we make a choice somewhere between the two. For example, suppose you brew Indonesian mandheling beans, which are characterized by an earthy flavor and profound texture. If you roast these beans over a charcoal fire to give them a charcoal scent, and use an espresso machine to extract crema, the natural oil and fat, you can enjoy a rich coffee taste by enhancing the aroma and texture of the beans. On the other hand, if you use El Salvador SHG beans with a good balance of soft acidity and sweetness, you need to take a different approach. If you make half of it medium roast and half dark roast and then extract it using flannel drip, you can extract a well-balanced coffee while maintaining the unique sweetness and soft acidity of coffee. The second rule of making a cup of coffee. Choose how long to roast the beans and which extraction method to use. It originated from the suggestion of a French barista Jean-Baptiste de Bellois in the early 19th century. 3. Georg Kolschitsky. Coffee is a bit of a contradictory drink. While there are maniacs who are obsessed with the taste of coffee and weigh the subtle differences in taste, there are still people who have a hard time getting acquainted with its taste. It is true that when you first taste the coffee, it feels a bit bitter. The situation was similar at the end of the 17th century, when coffee was just beginning to be introduced to Europe. After gaining hegemony in the Islamic world, the Ottoman Empire's army did not hide its ambition to cross over to Europe, and Vienna was the gateway which they had to pass through Eastern Europe to enter Western Europe. Therefore, 150,000 troops of the Ottoman Empire besieged Vienna in 1683. When the Viennese are weary of reinforcements that they couldn't wait for, a Polish-born Georg Kolschitsky made a valiant choice. After disguising himself as a Turk, he secretly left Vienna to see where the reinforcements had come. He managed to return to the city and reach it with a promise of imminent relief. Because of that information, the city council decided not to surrender to the Turkish forces and continue the fight instead. After the war, Kolschitsky was considered a hero by the grateful townspeople of Vienna. He was rewarded with a considerable sum of money and large amounts of coffee found in the captured camp of Turkish army. Kolschitsky, who was well aware of Islamic coffee culture while working as a Turkish interpreter, opened a coffee house in Vienna with the beans he received as a reward. However, there were many people in Vienna who were unfamiliar with the taste of coffee, so he had to lower the barrier to entry for coffee as much as possible. As a result, coffee with ingredients familiar to Viennese, such as honey and milk, appeared. This coffee is called mélange. It was around this time that coffee with milk began to establish itself as a representative coffee culture in Vienna. This led to the emergence of two rules of coffee making at both ends of Europe by the 19th century. One side was experimenting with a new extraction method to filter coffee, while the other side was developing a new recipe by adding milk. In the early 20th century, Italian baristas combined experimentation and development from both sides. They mixed milk with espresso that brewed quickly at high temperature and high pressure and called it cappuccino. As this drink moved to the United States, the proportion of milk increased dramatically to suit the taste of Americans who like milk. This American cappuccino is sometimes referred to as a latte. While the first and second rules gave coffee a subtle difference in taste, the third rule developed coffee into a new beverage by combining it with various ingredients. Milk and vanilla bean are added to make it soft and fragrant, chocolate or caramel is added to make it sweet, and apple, mint and lime are mixed to add freshness. Depending on the combination, different types of coffee can be made. The third rule of making a cup of coffee. Choose what ingredients to mix your coffee with. It originated from the suggestion of Kolschitsky, a Polish barista who was active in Austria at the end of the 17th century. Thanks to the pioneering baristas who developed the rules of coffee and the countless baristas who made good coffee by keeping the optimal combination of the three rules they established, we are able to enjoy this diverse coffee culture today. Which of the best coffees made by the rules of the barista is your favorite? If you like the video, hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you for watching.